Okay, ma'am, you are live now.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. Welcome back. So we have been discussing uh, Introduction to International Relations. That's the name of your paper. And we have been discussing so far, introducing the subject to you. And today I'm going to start with the very first topic in your syllabus. Yesterday, I discussed the syllabus. I hope all of you have downloaded the syllabus from RU website, or else it is also available on the SOL website. तो वहाँ से भी आप syllabus ले सकते हैं और जिनको copy नहीं मिले तो आप मुझे भी बता सकते हैं. Syllabus में आपके 3 unit हैं. You have 3 units in the syllabus. कल मैंने ये भी discuss किया था. And these 3 units have 3 different आइडियाज और इसीलिए हम इन तीनों के लिए डिफरेंट सेट ऑफ लेक्चर्स हमने एलोकेट किए हैं. द फर्स्ट यूनिट इज थ्योरेटिकल यूनिट जिसमें कि अर्ली डिबेट्स हैं यानी कि अप्रोचेस हैं यानी डिफरेंट पर्सपेक्टिव्स हाउ यू लुक एट इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस. हम किस तरह से उसको समझ सकते हैं डिफरेंट पर्सपेक्टिव्स के और व्यू पॉइंट्स को समझते हुए. सेकेंड जो आपका यूनिट है जो मॉड्यूल है that is all about Cold War, that is about the politics which took place and shaped what we see as internationals today. तो जब से उसकी शुरुआत हुई वर्ल्ड वॉर 1 से लेकर वर्ल्ड वॉर 2 के डेवलपमेंट्स और टिल नाउ हम जो एवोल्यूशन है उसको स्टडी करेंगे. इन स्पेशली एम्फेसिस वुड बी ऑन कोल्ड वॉर क्योंकि कोल्ड वॉर एक बहुत ही डिसाइसिव इवेंट रहा इंटरनेशनल अरीना में. ओके. Then the third unit is all about India and its relations with neighbors, India's foreign policy, so on and so forth. That's the current one. So next few lectures, I would be concentrating on the approaches, on the theoretical aspect of this paper. ठीक है? And आपका as far as your from examination point of view, the concentration on this module is like 50% of your question paper. All right. So theoretical aspect is as important as the current one. Maybe if time permits, then during the last lecture, we would also, try to discuss the questions and, a little bit of the important, topics, if I can give you an idea into as far as the examination point of view is concerned. So we'll try to do that in our last lectures and so on. Right. So kal humne kya kiya? Kal humne, I hope all of you are able to see the screen today. So yesterday we started with introducing international relations as a discipline, as a concept, as an understanding, right? So we discussed what is international relations. Then we went on to discuss how different thinkers, political thinkers have opined about international relations. We discussed about Quincy Wright's idea. We discussed how he distinguished between international relations as a condition and a discipline. Okay. Then Alfred Zimmerman, E.H. Carr, a very important name as far as international relations is concerned. Then Hartman. And then we distinguish between what is international relations and what is international politics. If there is a difference, a lot of people use it, synonymously and interchangeably. But however, there is a very thin line of difference between these two terms, and that's what we discussed yesterday. And then we also discussed how, the evolution of this discipline has taken place, what it was in 1919 when this whole thing began, and now, because this I have already explained that this is relatively a very new subject area. It is not a very old area. So a lot of new researches have undergone in making up of international relations what we see today. So then we discussed the changing nature of international relations, how it has evolved, how people conceived of international relations, especially the thinkers, how they used to write, what was their point of view, what was the world politics at that time. And now with the changing world politics, all the dynamics have changed, the relations between different states have changed, and having so much change, it has reflected on the relations as well. And then, of course, we discuss the scope. Why do we study international relations? What is the relevance, the scope, the relevance? All right, that is what we discussed. And now about the approaches. Yesterday, I just began with this whole idea of approaches. The approaches have been, you know, expanded, or rather, they have placed in international relations in terms of debates. So that's why the topic says early debates. So there are, basically, chronologically speaking, there are 4 debates. Okay, so part and parcel, these are approaches. This is the evolution. This is different perspectives, the way you want to call it. Okay, for everybody's convenience, I'm calling it approaches right now. There have been 4 great debates, as they are called, in historically speaking. So the first one being realism and liberalism, which we are going to take up today. The second one being behavioralism and traditionalism, in a very comparative spirit. You know how behavioralism in 1960s, there was a trend which emerged in the world politics, and what was the difference? How were they different from the earlier classical exponents or the traditionalists? Then the third great debate is all about emergence of different paradigms. So liberalism, Marxism, all had a lot to say about international politics within this period of 1970s and 80s. So we see a lot of new opinions and new perspectives emerging. That's part of the third great debate. And the fourth great debate is probably the contemporary, most contemporary, and the current one, which started from 80s onwards, and it's still continuing, whereby new alternative approaches are emerging. There is a new way of looking at international relations. The ideas which emerged during 1919, when people started writing about this discipline, have definitely undergone a lot of changes, owing to the fact that world has undergone a lot of change in terms of events, in terms of issues it's dealing with, in terms of problems, in terms of developments, in terms of geographical changes which has happened so far. So everything has definitely impacted upon the making of what we see as international relations or international politics today. So fourth is the probably. However, there are many different approaches and strands. It's not possible within this much time to talk about all the strands in detail, right? So we will concentrate on few of those. We'll be touching upon each and every era, like the 4 debates I'm saying. So we'll start with the realism. We'll go on to little bit about behavioralism and institutionalism. We'll touch upon the third debate a little bit, and then we'll move on to the fourth great debate, where we will not do all the known approaches, but we will concentrate on the feminism, because that's part of your syllabus. So we will choose few approaches within these debates, and we will concentrate on those. So let me quickly give you again a brush up and brief detailing about the approaches, and then we'll move on to realism in great detail. Okay, so the first debate being realism, idealism, and neorealism. I am just going to open the arguments because remember that we are going to take it up later in the coming lectures in detail. All right. So just to introduce realism, idealism, and neorealism to you, it is really interesting to know that there are only 2 broad shades of contrasting theories or perspectives about the nature of international relations. You have to understand that within international relations, the 2 main perspectives are realism and idealism, out of which, in fact, realism is more relevant and also more important. So by exam point of view also, you must remember that. Okay. So what do these perspectives say? One perspective is that the international relations, by its very nature, is conflict-ridden. It is always talking about conflict within the states. The other perspective describes international relations, or which I'm going to call IR from now on. So IR as essentially being cooperative and peaceful. So these are two different and contrasting viewpoints. One is only talking about conflicts and one is completely talking about peacemaking and cooperation. Okay, so broadly speaking, the principal theoretical approaches to the study of IR agree with one or the above mentioned assumptions. Usually they take sides. All the debates so far, you will see that they lean either towards this or this. So that's how they progress. Then there are other theoretical frameworks which sometimes they try to combine these two. They bring them into fusion, like neorealism or other contemporary debates, and then reconcile the two contrasting viewpoints. They try to bring them closer. Okay, quickly, what is realism? The core element of realist theory is power. It is all about power. Sovereign states seek power for their security. Every state fears attack from other states, and therefore all states want to accumulate more and more power. That's the basis and gist of realist theory. That's how the theory has been built up. That's the main assumption. Okay, and what about idealism then? Idealists and their thinking is linked to the ideas of liberal internationalists. All the liberals lean towards the idealist theory. It's also called liberal theory sometimes. In some books or articles, you may not see the word idealism or idealist, you may see liberalism as well. Okay, it would mean the same. So they consider that despite the international system being anarchic, which means there is no system as such, there is no security, there is still a communitarian consciousness. Communitarian consciousness एक समुदायवादी का एहसास है that we are together. There is a possibility of progress in the international system, and that can be achieved through cooperation and progress. साथ में बढ़ने का एक जज्बा है that towards a lasting peace and prosperity and social well-being, which is based on values and aspirations shared by humans. So basically, a very moral, ethical stand which is taken by liberals, and they believe that human nature is essentially good, and that's why there is a possibility that without war, without violence, without aggression, we may be able to establish a lot of peace in the world. Okay, अब neo-realism की बात आती है. What is neo-realism? Neo-realism is also known as structural realism, because जो old realism है or the main realism है, sometimes it's referred to as classical realism because that's the first one, and neo-realism is the revised form of realism, and it is also called structural realism because Waltz, who is the main thinker of neo-realist tradition, was quite influenced by the structural theory. Okay, okay, let's just read. Neorealism, also known as structural realism, is one of the current approaches to the study of international relations. Waltz, Kenneth Waltz, Greco, Cohen, and Joseph Nye are among the prominent neorealists. Neorealists believe that might is right. Okay, might means anybody who is strong survives the system. Okay, so it is essentially a Hobbesian idea. Survival of the fittest, like we say. Okay, the great powers are always engaged in permanent rivalry. The structure has more or less remained one of the anarchy, though the prominent actors have always been changing. The term structure has been referred to as how the actors in a system stand in a relation to each other. So you view the world as a structure, and then all the states as actors. How they behave with each other determines the structure. Okay, the present structure is anarchical, where state domination are rampant. One finds powerful states are the most interested in trying to prevent others from improving relative capabilities, right? So Cohen and Nye add that with the increasing role of non-state actors, we discussed it yesterday that there is state and then now there are non-state actors like MNCs, other international organizations, etc., etc. This structure has become more complex and unpredictable. In short, neorealism believes that the nation states still remain the most important actors in world politics. That is where they agree with the realists, that state is the most important actor. The behavior of the state can be explained rationally. States seek power and calculate their interest in terms of power. All these they share with the scholars of realism. Okay. Now, where do they differ? Here. However, the neorealists also add that the international system is characterized by anarchy and emerging multi-centric activities. So there is no fixed center now. State is not at the center because the center has shifted. There are activities which are emanating from other sources other than the state. So non-state actors are also relevant now. This complexity is further compounded by international terrorism. So new issues have come up. Religious warfares, increasing incidents of civil wars, and emerging competitive multinational corporations. So the internal situation of a state is also somewhere responsible for what we see today is happening between two states. All right. So the internal condition of a state, what is happening within, also determines how it is behaving in the world scenario. We'll take it up anyway in greater detail later. Apart from this, this is the part of first great debate: realism, idealism, neorealism. Then the second debate was when we are talking about behavioral or scientific approaches. Now, what is behavioral and scientific approach? Behavioral approaches to study of IR are often claimed by their Western adherents to be scientific because they are based on quantitative calculations. All the previous approaches, previous to behavioral revolution in 60s, the idea was limited to literature reading, literature review, but then calculations and quantitative methods were first time used by the behavioral thinkers. Now they brought the quantitative calculations into international relations as well. Okay, they made us more aware of the complex nature of conflicts and provided many valuable insights into decision making. The ultimate objective of the behavioralist scholar is to develop a general theory of international relations, which can be applied everywhere, right? So it was like more about practical application. The traditional approach was rooted largely in political science and drew heavily from law, history, philosophy. Like I say, it was more about normative thoughts, right? With the help of the behavioral approach, a discipline of international relations is at last beginning to emerge, which is devoted to behavioral studies, okay? Which is about facts, which is about quantifying things, more accurate and more scientific. So there are several theories which may be lumped together under this whole scientific and behavioral approach. Some of them are systems theory, some are called bargaining, game theories. Quickly we'll look at system theory. A system is defined as a set of elements interacting with each other. Another important feature of the system is that it has a boundary which separates it from the environment. So systems theory view the world as a system. There is a system, okay? There is an input and there is an output, there is environment, okay? And a lot of influences are coming from everywhere, but there is a whole system. So it's very organized, okay? Generally speaking, a system may be either natural, like what we have as a solar system, or it can be mechanical, like we create, a car, a clock, or a computer. And the third way of looking at a system is social, that there is family. Family is also an organized structure, it's a system. So the social system itself may be related either to society or economy or politics or international system. So basically, the system which hereby international relations theorists are talking about is a social one. It's not a natural one, it's not a mechanical one, but a social one, where human beings interact with each other. The general concept of an international system and of international systems formed the basis of work for many major scholars. कौन है? Carl W. Deutsch and Raymond Aron. ये सबसे prominent नाम है systems theory के. As Aron observed, there has never been an international system including the whole of the planet. But in the post-war period, post-war, कौन से war? Second World War. We are talking always about Second World War. Always the reference point is that. But in the post-war period, for the first time, humanity is living on and the same history. Everybody has undergone the same apathy, the same agony, and the same suffering, right? And there has emerged some kind of a global system. जब भी कभी एक particular event से सब लोग गुजरते हैं with similar kind of experiences, तो जो change होता है, it reflects everywhere. And the latest could be the corona experience. So the whole world underwent this kind of change. It was not only India, China, Pakistan, but also Europe, also Australia. Everybody was experiencing this change. All right. So when we are talking about international relations here, Aron is commenting about the post-war period, how the World War II had its impact everywhere. That what then happened is emerged a system which is global system. Now it was not isolated state system, but a global system. It is greatly heterogeneous. Everybody has its own space, but not to an extent that scholars may fail to hold them together in a discipline. So as a matter of fact, Stanley Hoffman's working definition of the discipline was sufficient, and what he says is, an international system, according to Hoffman, is a pattern of relations between the basic units of world politics, which is characterized by the scope of the objectives pursued by these units and of the task performed amongst them, as well as the means used in order to achieve these goals and perform those tasks. की definition है हॉफमैन की, जो उन्होंने अपनी किताब System and Processes in International Politics 1957 में दी है. सबसे notable नाम जो है when we talk about systems theory is Professor Morton Kaplan. Later when we do systems theory, we are going to do Kaplan's, we'll touch upon Kaplan's ideas only. Okay, Morton Kaplan is considered the most influential in the systems theory or theorizing of international relations. He presented a number of real and hypothetical models. उन्होंने बहुत सारे models दिए. 6 well-known models are there. यहाँ पे I'm just going to name them quickly. First is the balance of power system. Second is loose bipolar system. Third is tight bipolar system. Fourth is universal actor system. Fifth is hierarchical system. And sixth is unit veto system. You may not, we will not go into detail right now, but when we'll do systems approach, we will explain them. Although, Kaplan did not say that his 6 systems were likely to emerge in that order only. कि पहले ये आया बाद में वो आया, but it was expected that the superpower being very powerful, non-aligned countries or the newly independent countries, they were likely to lose their status and become part of one or the other power block, leading to a tight bipolar world. That is how the world began right now. With the collapse of the former Soviet Union in 1991, the erstwhile bipolarity means when the world was divided into 2 blocks, this phenomena ended, because obviously one bloc, that is Soviet Union, had collapsed. So while the United States emerged as more powerful than other countries, many countries like Germany and Japan, they also simultaneously emerged as great economic powers. Thus, depending upon how one analyzes the emerging global order, it may be characterized as unipolar or multipolar. Now, from economic point of view, we had a multipolar arrangement, when from a political point of view, we had a unipolar arrangement. So depending on which order you are analyzing it from. Okay, so the present situation does not, however, fall strictly within any of these 6 models anymore. There are other, models which are suggested by Columbus and Wolfe, like a multi-block model, and I'm not going to get into the detail right now. But what they are trying to say is that a multi-block or inter-regional model exists, whereby there is a national fragmentation, and multi-block is that world is divided into 7 mutually exclusive spheres of influence. So each of the sphere would be controlled by one major power. Say economy is controlled by a few, the social or ideological content is controlled by one, and there are different spheres of influence. All right. So it is not about one, but many superpowers like multi-block system. Then there is national fragmentation model. That will be the outcome of a political and territorial disintegration, where a lot of ethnicities or minorities and tribals or racial separatist movement, they may cause many large states to crumble down or disintegrate into smaller fragmented units. Like we have example of Soviet Union, of course, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, they have split into several sovereign states. So this fragmentation also, what it leads to is decentralization of power. Okay. Then post-nuclear war model. Then this model talks about the world. Post-nuclear war model is the world after a catastrophic nuclear war. If it happens, then what happens after a nuclear war? If such a war takes place, its aftermath would be ghastly. Of course, we all know that. And in such a situation, only the most tyrannical regimes would be able to maintain orderly distribution of food, shelter, and medicine. A new order will be found out to overcome such chaotic. So which means the third one, the post-nuclear war model, which Wolf and they are proposing, it is basically a futuristic one. Okay, they are just visualizing what happens if so and so takes place, and this, if this event occurs, then what would be the likelihood, the face of the world. Okay, within the systems approach, within the behavioralist tradition, within the structural tradition, we have systems approach and also game theory. What is this game theory? Let's quickly look at it. Game theory attempts to provide models for studying world politics, especially in highly competitive situations when outcomes of the actions are difficult to anticipate. Basically, this has led scholars to create a game theory for more scientific study of calculation of probabilities. This is more mathematical, okay? And the names within this game theory are John von Neumann, Oscar Morgenstern, Carl Deutsch, Martin Schubick. They are majorly, the names. The whole idea of game theory, basically, economists were more, inclined towards this kind of perspective. Though the economists were the first one to adopt it for their purpose, but it has been applied to many other fields. And similarly, it came into the field of international relations also. So in its very simplest version, the game theory is the model of a zero-sum game that describes the situation of conflict and competition in which one party's total loss is exactly equal to the other adversary's total gain. So it's like a, they are looking at the face of the world in terms of a game. Like the system theorists view it as a system, the game theorists, they think that there is some kind of game being played between the players, and the states are different players. Okay. Okay, so I'm not going into the details, and two most important kinds of games that have been suggested are chicken game and the game of prisoner's dilemma. When you read your book or article, whatever you're referring to, you would also come across these two main names, that these are the most important kinds of game which are talked about in international politics. One is the chicken game and the prisoner's dilemma. In the chicken game situation, just to explain a little bit, in the chicken game situation, two car drivers are going in the middle of the road towards each other from the opposite side. Unless one of them stops on the side and gives way to other, there is a possibility of serious accident, which may even result in the death of one or both the drivers. Anyway, who gives way to the other will suffer a loss of reputation, but accident will be avoided. So this is similar to the situations which nations would face. So there would be an ethical question also in front of them, which path they would like to choose. Okay, so nations often face such a situation, and of course, no one wants to suffer the loss of their reputation, So the underlying idea of chicken game is that in spite of not being able to know the intention of its opponents, a country's foreign policy or makers can adopt such a course as would ensure its own interest only if it does not mind the other country also benefiting from course of action. So you drive in such a manner, so to say, your foreign policy would reflect not only protection of your own national interest, but also doing it in a manner that even if the opponent is getting benefited, it's fine unless you are not suffering from a loss. Okay. Prisoner's dilemma is a very different kind of game, which like a nation is like a prisoner, often faces dilemma without having the slightest idea of the opponent's intention, where this model has two persons and one is charged with murder, are kept in two different cells. They are not able to see each other and talk to each other, and you never know if the other person has already surrendered. So that is the dilemma which you face and how you proceed further. So similar fashion, they see the states also kind of getting caught in these kind of dilemmas where they do not know, the behavior of the other state is very unpredictable, yet they have to, you know, very carefully they will have to move in that game so that they don't lose it. So that's the whole idea of game theory. Then another approach we are going to discuss today is integration approach. Okay, so now we have done realism, idealism is the first part of the debate. The second part of the debate was the behavioralist tradition, or let's say, the second great debate is about structuralism, and which has a lot of quantification, mathematics, and economics. And now this is the third approach, which is the integration approach. This theory is associated with the names of Charles Kegley and Witkoff. In an essay which was published in 1993, they rejected the realist view of human nature. That's how they evolved. They argue that human beings has diverse markups and that human action is based on voluntary choice influenced by the environment. जिस तरह के भी environment में हम लोग सब जीते हैं, all of us are, even if we agree or not, we are influenced by that kind of an environment. So the liberals reject the view that international relations are anarchic. They argue that the international system today is based on transnational interactions because we are going global. We are discussing, exchange of ideas is taking place that creates areas of interdependence, right? So societies and government are being knit together by growing cultural homogeneity and economic and social interdependence. This is a very positive approach in the sense that it sees the world is getting integrated. It is coming closer rather than a conflicting situation as visualized by the realists. This idea is talking about integration. Okay, so various international agencies, regimes like World Trade Organization, they promote integration. They emphasize the growing role of non-state actors like NGOs and regional organizations. They promote regional and global interdependence. So basically, this is an approach which is popularized by the liberals, and they do not accept the view that the world has become unipolar. They don't say that. They say that post-Cold War years, the world is moving in the direction of a multipolarity. We don't have concentration of power, as some people think that it is only one great power in the world, but rather the world is moving in the direction of multipolarity. We have different pockets of power. At the same time, there is an increasing interstate cooperation to reduce mistrust and tension in order to promote peace. This is the inherent idea within this integration approach. Okay, so global interdependence has led to a growing concern among all governments about nuclear proliferation, how they are getting integrated, because the issues which are, or the problems the states face today are quite similar, like nuclear proliferation, global recession, ozone depletion, climatic changes, some illnesses and diseases like AIDS. So these common concerns indicate interdependence and need for the scholars to examine these problems in the context of integration. They therefore insist on the study of these and other organizations, as they believe that expanding the UN system will definitely promote interdependence. So to sum up, the liberal concern for interdependence is related to multipolarity in the post-Cold War period. increasing role of UN and other non-governmental and regional organizations, and consequent integration under the influence of Western industrialized countries. Remember, this approach, though it talks about interdependence, it talks about cooperation, it talks about peace, but from a Western point of view. All right, mostly the adherents and the writers are the Western thinkers, and they believe in the progress is basically getting, it is still concentrated or centered around the West. Next important approach in this regard would be dependency approach. We are also going to take it up in detail in the few lectures, but just to introduce it to you, what is the dependency approach? This is part of your syllabus and it's a very important one also. Dependency approach, where the realists argue for hegemonic stability and the liberals for interdependence, two concerns we have already seen. The concerned scholars of the third world, that is, countries like India and other newly independent states, however, have always argued that the main basis for the contemporary international relationships should be found in their own underdevelopment. Okay, there are different ways we look at countries where we see them as developed and developing, and these dependency theorists also add a term called underdeveloped, which is neither developing or it cannot fall in the category of developed either. So it has not been a very big formal theory, but it's basically a framework, a way to think, a way to look at different things, not only international perspective, but also other things, the social or economic existence. Okay, so this basically originated, it is the origin is from Latin America. Latin American political thinkers or political scientists developed this kind of an idea whereby they challenged the dominant myth that the solutions for the ills of the underdevelopment in the third world lay in the following of the modern realist prescriptions from the West. So basically this approach is talking about looking for a solution from within, because they say that all the writings so far and all the opinions so far in international relations as well are basically Western oriented. This is what they are questioning. They are saying that if you want to end or make peace with the world, we have to end the underdevelopment which is taking place in the third world countries, and that is only possible if we don't follow the Western models, rather have a model of our own. Okay, so in the field of international relations, the scholars from the dependency school, they argue that first is that the present conditions of dependence in the periphery largely are due to the past exploitation by the developed countries, that from in the core now. All this we are going to take it up in detail, and so what they are saying is, trying to say is that right now the condition in which the third world countries are, somewhere the first world or the developed countries are responsible for it due to its past exploitation, whether economic, whether political, they are responsible for the situation. Second assumption is that the relations among nations therefore are essentially asymmetrical. They don't share an equal relation with each other, obviously. And third is, such an asymmetry is not merely confined to state relationships, because international relations transactions involve a host of ties among groups and classes between, within, and across the nations. So it is not only between state to state, but between interstate as well. Okay, so arguments centered around structures of dependence, both of the past and the present, and the emphasis was laid on factors and forces which were not of primary concern for either the realist or new realist, and even the liberals, inspired by largely the Marxian influences. So basically the liberals or the realists at this point of time, till dependency approach emerged, they were more or less concentrating on and relying on the sources which were provided to them from the Western countries. All right. So this dependency framework forced them to think in the other direction, think of the development or the structure of dependencies prevailing in the underdeveloped or the third world countries. Okay, basically dependency approach is a result of Marxian influences. The politics amongst nations have been considered largely as an expression of global forces and the currents of development in all of the unevenness throughout the history that continues till the present. That is what they talk about. So important names under this would be Professor F.H. Cardoso, who later became the president of Brazil, Raul Prebisch, and his colleague Andre Gunnar Frank. These are well-known names which are associated with this framework. Okay, so we are going to talk about this framework. This forms the part of the third debate, where there is a paradigm shift. The paradigm which was more or less concentrating on liberals, now there is a debate between different paradigms. The thinking, the thought process is being questioned. How to look at the world from above or the world from below. Okay, right. And the last fourth great debate, from amongst the fourth great debate, we have the feminist approach. Okay, we have some contemporary approaches. The feminist approach, as the name suggests, this is the most recent one but influential approach, which believes that international relations are competitive, power oriented, and exploitative, mainly because of male domination in politics. So they view that the argument is that the international relations would be more balanced and effective if women were given their due share in politics through several ways. There may be various ways where they can become actively involved in politics, or else supportingly, as non-state actors, anything. So liberal feminists, you must have done a feminism now, and there are different strands of feminism. Liberal feminism, we have radical feminism. So liberal feminists believe that education, political mobilization, and pressure to change will bring about the desired results because they believe in peaceful method of struggle. But radical feminists, on the other hand, they feel that capitalism is the main cause of gender inequality, and therefore adoption of socialism will hasten the process of gender equality, which in turn will ensure peace in the world. It is argued that it is man's gender bias imposed by Western philosophy that also needs to be overcome. Thus, the feminist theory traces all problems of international relations to gender inequality and domination by men. We will also, see it in great detail in the our few lectures from now. Critics, however, point out that gender differences are natural, they are rooted in biology, and it is not men, but the society in which we grow, which is to be addressed for remedies. However, it is also the growing up and social conditionalities which the feminists are questioning. The important names in this regard would be Cynthia Enloe and Spike Peterson. These are the few important names, some important names associated with feminist approach. Okay, these are the main approaches I've introduced throughout the four debates. And apart from the above mentioned ones, there are also other new theories which are very, very important to understand the changing nature of international relations or international politics, like green politics that highlights the issue of climate change and environmental preservation, post-structuralism that talks about deconstruction and promotes diversity in thoughts, more plurality, and post-colonialism that exposes the hegemony of ideas, how ideas and culture have been a constant dominated by the Western countries, and also belittling the Eastern values. So all these and many more ideas are reflecting on the international scene as well. So these are the different approaches we are going to take up. So today, I hope that so far everything is clear to you. And today we are going to start with the first debate, that is realism, idealism, and neorealism. Okay. All right. Now that we have discussed so many approaches, and there are various ways of looking at international relations and viewing international politics. However, the two most important variants of the traditional approach of international relations are realism and idealism. Though I may be using the word traditional here, but we must understand that the relevance of realism and idealism in the international politics or international relations as such has not, mm, I mean, it stands tall. It's still relevant. It is not that because they are part of the traditional approach, they have, the contemporary have taken over. No, as we suggested and we discussed in the earlier, part of the discussion, I also mentioned that most of the approaches which stemmed after realism and idealism came into existence happened to either lean with these two, in agreement with either of the two, or else, seeking an alternative but within these domains. So you have to understand that these two names, realism and idealism, are by far the most important ones. And of these two also, realism is very, very important to understand the nature of international politics in the past as well as today. All right. So taking inspiration, I'm now reading the text, if you can see, taking inspiration from Kautilya and Machiavelli, the leading 20th century realists, George Kennan and Hans Morgenthau. These are very important names. And always remember that when you're writing a paper, names, when you're writing an approach, it's very important not only to write the ideas, but also who gave these ideas. That is, the names of the exponents. These are very, very important ones. So Hans Morgenthau argued that the struggle for power is the central point of all international relations. Okay? Individuals believe that others are always trying to attack and destroy them, and therefore they must be continuously ready to kill others in order to protect themselves. Okay? This basic human instinct guides the states as well. Thus, the realists argue that rivalry and strife among the nations in some form or the other are always present. So, realists argue that rivalry is imminent and it's there always. It's like a permanent nature, part of the nature of the state. Just as self-interest guides the individual's behavior, similarly, national interest guides the foreign policy of all the nation states. Continued conflict is the reality of international relations. Everybody is struggling for power. So they attribute that this to the struggle of power is imminent and it is very much part of the international politics, which was yesterday and today as well. So thus, national interest is defined in terms of power and is the only reality of international relations. The realists do not attach much significance to the means. For them, national interest is the end. Now, how you reach it, how you protect it, is not a lot of concern to these people. And it has to be promoted at all costs. Okay. So Morgenthau's influential book, the name of the book is Politics Among Nations, that carried the torch of realism far and wide. For the realists, distribution of powers among states is all that is there to explain in the IR. Given a particular distribution of power, the realists claim that it is possible to explain both the characteristics of the system and the behavior of the individual state. So they justify the behavior, they justify the system, they justify the structure, everything on the basis of power. They say it is basically the distribution of power or the struggle of power. That is what impacts the states, and that's how they behave in turn. Okay. Let's say idealists. The idealists firmly believe that the essential goodness of human nature will eventually prevail and that a new world order would emerge which would be marked by the absence of war, inequality and tyranny. Exactly opposite to the realists stand idealism. Idealists or liberals as they are called, they believe in the goodness of human nature. They believe that everyone, all the humans are essentially good. They believe in peace, and that's why eventually goodness will prevail. People will realize that war will do no good to them, and that's why they'll cooperate with each other, and that is how we will see a more equal and a peaceful society. This new world order would be brought about by the use of reason, education, and science. So there is no talk about power or national interest, but it's about reasonability, education, and science that would promote coexistence. Right? Idealism presents a picture of a future international relations which is free from power politics, violence, and immorality. Okay. Idealism argues that an international organization commanding respect of nation states would pave the way for a world free of conflicts and war. So how it is going to happen? With the help of an international organization. They always believe there has to be a catalyst, there has to be an international organization which would facilitate, uh, you know, uh, cooperation among states. Thus, the crucial point on which the realist and the idealist sharply differ is that idea of power. What are the important names? As far as idealism is concerned, Saint Simon, Aldous Huxley, Mahatma Gandhi, Woodrow Wilson, they are the prominent idealists. So morality is vital for them as they aim at international peace and cooperation. Naitikta, morality, ethics, values, everything is associated with idealism. Okay? An analysis of realism and idealism will show that both have their validity provided they give up their extremism. Both are extreme views. One is only talking about goodness and one is only talking about struggle for power and by hook or by crook we have to achieve it and stuff like that. The approach that takes a middle position between idealistic utopianism and cynical realism is called eclecticism. This is just for your knowledge. It has been described as a sort of synthesis which brings the both views together, all right, of the pessimism of realism, that they don't want to look beyond power, and the optimism of idealism, that they see nth number of possibility of staying together beautifully and peacefully. That's how optimistic they are. So eclecticism tries to use the best in both realism and idealism. The former has been described by Quincy Wright as a representative of short-run politics, where idealism represents long-term policies of internationalism. So realists have been called the children of darkness and idealists as the children of light. Nebo regards the children of darkness as evil and wicked, but virtuous. But again, they say that realists are also wise, even if they are wicked, because they understand the power of self-will, that they want to achieve something, they have to work on themselves. And the idealists are foolish to the extent because they underestimate the risk of anarchy in the international community. So both have something to learn from this, That's why eclecticism emerged. That's the middle part. Okay, moving on. Realist school is a long-standing and dominant theoretical tradition, as they have already said. So few questions which emerge, after doing this, completing this lecture, you'll be able to understand the theoretical assumptions of realism, the principal thinkers and who have shaped the realist school of international relations. The realism has stood the test of criticisms and stood the test of time. And is it even relevant in explaining the, course of evolution in the contemporary world? That's what we are going to do. So besides E.H. Carr, the historian, Hans Morgenthau and Kenneth Waltz, a number of other scholars have also developed ideas and insights within that realist school. There are major differences. There are so many strands, but we are not able to take up all the strands here. However, we will just focus on the core ideas, core principles of realism and neorealism after that. Okay, so evolution, how it all started, this whole first great debate sort of thing. So realism has inherited a long and rich intellectual tradition. Its principal claims can be found in important works from Greece, Rome, India, and China. The scholars suggest that Greek philosophers' Thucydides' history of the Peloponnesian War illustrates realism's skepticism about the restraining effects of morality. Thucydides notes that what is right matters only between equals. When you are not equal, then you do not talk about right and wrong. All right. So otherwise, strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. ठीक है, ये विधि का विधान है उनके लिए. That right only matters when we talk about between equals. When you are not equal, then strong do what they can do and weak suffer from what they must. This is the crux of the thinking behind realist theory. Okay. Kautilya's in his Arthashastra is concerned with the survival and expansion of the state. Kautilya instructs the ruler in the usefulness of balance of power system and carving out spheres of influence. So this is another sphere of influence on realist theory. So it's about Greek philosopher Thucydides, Kautilya, or Niccolo Machiavelli. He was the Italian political philosopher who advised the ruler to be strong and efficient and be concerned primarily with power and security. Such a ruler is not bound by individual morality. Any action that is deemed important for the survival of the state carries with it a built-in justification. So realists draw a lot from these above-mentioned three thinkers and their ideas, and a very important name would be of Thomas Hobbes and his notion of the state of nature. Like Hobbes's man in the state of nature, you all have done political theory and you understand that when we do Thomas Hobbes, he has talked about state of nature and human nature. So his state of nature, the realists borrow from his theory and they talk about Hobbes's state of nature is similar to the modern state, which is rational, a calculating actor concerned primarily with its own security and aggrandizement, and in the absence of any particular ruler, an absolute ruler, to enforce order and punish violators, Hobbes's supreme and self-centered individual pursues without restraints whatsoever his interest by constantly engaging in conflict. The individual in the state of nature lives a life which is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Now, all this is true in international sphere as well. The realists believe that same is true of a state. Okay, so they are just swapping the position of humans or human nature, state of nature in Hobbesan theory and putting it in the international arena. They are saying that state living in the anarchic international system. So within the international system, the state is living an anarchic life. The assumptions about the international relations as inhabited by rational actors being intrinsically anarchic, the state seeking to maximize their power and control over the necessary material resources, took quite a lot of time to become the core elements of realism. The fact that how they are going close to Hobbes is that their strictly belief is that in order to protect oneself, there are no boundaries. Okay, one can go to any extent, there are no restraints, like the individual in Hobbes's theory, because there is no absolute ruler, Leviathan. We remember Hobbesan theory that till the Leviathan emerges, there is a chaotic state of nature. There is chaos. Everybody is fighting against each other. That's how they say the life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, because nobody knows who's against whom. Everybody is conspiring. That's how realists perceive the international system. They think that you are living in an unpredictable world where you don't know what is being schemed against you, and that's how you should be prepared. Maximize your power and control all the elements. But identification of these core elements as assumptions fundamental to realism was as equal in importance to the subject of IR as was their significance to the politics of realism pursued by the big powers of the day, largely in the period between the two world wars. So the inter-world war periods between the World War I and World War II, there were so many realizations, and realism particularly grew in this period, where they felt there is a threat to the security. Okay, so establishing realism as external conduct of powerful countries, and also as a political perspective or framework, especially after the Second World War, was at the heart of the identification and refinement of these assumptions. Whatever these assumptions were, deriving and uh, siding and leaning with all the other above mentioned thinkers, those assumptions, they became more true after Second World War, and they became more refined after that. Though they existed before it, but post 1945 they were a so-called revival, because the powerful states, the big powers in that period, they started to believe and also practically to live up to the realist tradition. Okay, Edward Hallett Carr, E.H. Carr, as he is well known, in the arena of international relations, is a noted historian, a theorist, diplomat, and a journalist of British origin. In his famous work, The 20 Years Crisis, which is Carr had aimed at developing a foundation of international politics. In this book, particularly, uh, his realist thinking is basically visible in this book. Very much his ideas and his realist thinking is very much present in this book. With his emphasis on realist thinking, Carr had wanted to correct the imagination of world politics that he thought was then based on utopia. Utopia means imagination, a filament of imagination, or utopian wishing, and not on realistic or empirical basis. Carr conceived of realism as the impact of thinking upon wishing, an end of the utopian period. He advocated realism after criticizing the utopian or idealist view of the world politics. It's now very, very important and pertinent to understand what is that idealist view of politics which forced E.H. Carr to write in his book against those whole utopian wishing. Continuously he's mentioning that the impact of that thinking was so much so that he wanted to cut down on that and bring forth the reality to the people, and that's why this whole realist thinking began. Okay, so let's just now quickly take a look what was the situation at that time and what were the conditions which forced people, or rather all the international thinkers at that time, to turn towards realism. Okay, what is this utopia they are talking about? What is this utopian wishing? What is this imagination which they are trying to condemn? This imagination is basically the idealism, because idealism was much older than realism, and at that point of time, due to Woodrow Wilson, the US president, this idealism or idealist thought became very, very popular. Okay, so all these realist thinkers aimed at, or they were targeting, this idealist vision. So before we go into the detail of the realist theory, we must understand what was this idealist vision and why they were so against it. So the First World War, when that happened, it brought a lot of devastation for the imperial powers of Europe, especially the vanquished Central Powers. How to prevent reoccurrence of another similar destructive war? That was the question which was going on in the international politics. So US President Woodrow Wilson, he came up with a solution. He came up with a 14-point program wherein he proposed establishment of an international organization to maintain peace, which culminated in the creation of the League of Nations in 1919. That was the first international organization which was very thoughtfully conceived to maintain peace amongst all the nations. He also proposed codification of customary international law. Wilson was of the view that establishment of an international legal institutional framework will deter states from going to war and encourage them to abide the laws and decisions of the League of Nations. Now, how was it possible? Wilson made two more important proposals. Firstly, the principle of collective security. That whole idea of collective security, that we don't feel threatened from each other, that will be enshrined in the charter of the League. Okay, and secondly, Wilson also proposed the right to self-determination of minorities in Europe, so they don't feel insecure. Okay, so in general, people of the colonies and the minorities would have their voice of their own. These are two very important things which President Woodrow Wilson at that point of time he could visualize, that the freedom of people and the voice of the people is very, very important. They should not feel threatened. Unfortunately, this liberal idealism was very short-lived because European states did not change their behavior and their rivalries continued. Because the nature of European states is such that they believe in practice of expansionism, and this expansionism again led to the outbreak of Second World War. So from First World War I to World War II till 1939, that period is basically when the first opinions in terms of what we say idealist thinking or liberal thinking emerged in the world order. Okay, so within 20 years of the First World War, the Second World War emerged, and then the idealist thinking or the utopian thinking, as Carr is calling it, it crumbled down. So for people like Carr, talking of subjects like disarmament, collective security, international police force, which Woodrow Wilson and others were talking about at that point of time, that we should have international organizations, we should have an international laws, we must have international police force so that global peace is maintained. It became utopia or utopian wishing for Carr. And that's how he developed over a century between 1815 Vienna Conference, 1914 outbreak of the First World War, everything, all these which saw those liberal ideas, they crumbled down. Carr rejected liberal idealism or Wilsonian idealism as it was called sometimes. He said that it was not based on rigorous thinking. There has to be more thinking. It's not real. It's just very sentimental and emotional kind of stuff. That's why he calls it wishing. He says more thinking should go into it. He called it utopia because he thought that it was not even based on an analysis of the reality. All right. Events proved Carr's criticism of idealism correct. League of Nations also failed. It could not survive. It failed to have an honorable peace treaty. It could not conclude any honorable peace treaty among European imperial or colonial powers. Treaty of Versailles or any other treaty, they reflect the interest of the victors or the powerful and the humiliation of the vanquished. League of Nations also failed to stop any kind of arms race amongst the European powers. It did not stop. Disarmament or collective security and international police force, they were important political ideas, but however, these arrangements never saw the light of the day. With the US not being part of it and several other nations abandoning it, the League and its ideals stood defeated and abandoned within few years. In this context, therefore, when Carr was tossing the idea of realism, he actually meant to develop the foundation of international relations as a discipline as well as practice that would scientifically reflect the reality of the world or would proximate to a true picture of the world. So this is where the whole realism and its ideas begin. And with the defeat of idealism, with the defeat of liberalism, the realism, became more popular and more relevant in the international scenario. I think it's time today, and I would have to stop here. We will continue tomorrow. We'll take up realism from tomorrow here. Vishalji, can you hear me?
हाँ जी मैम.
हाँ, टाइम हो गया है क्या?
हाँ जी.
हाँ, तो हम लोग कल कंटिन्यू करेंगे. Right?
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone. We'll meet tomorrow.